The name his own people called him was Laleal. That was, of course, just his calling name. And because it meant almost the same thing that he meant to us, we called him Lucky. This was no transgression of courtesy or culture arrogance on our part. His true name, after the fashion of his people, was already long and growing, a descriptive catalogue, useful only for records and ritual occasions. A calling name may be anything derived from the whole, and Lucky was delighted to have a new nickname from us, in our language. He was, when we came to the island, just 8 years old as we reckon. His people count differently. To them, he was halfway through his 3rd decade. In 5 more seasons, he would undergo the apprenticeship rites that would end his first age. Either way, he was just past the midpoint between babyhood and puberty. Like all of his people, he was brown-skinned and dark-eyed, black-haired. Like most of his age, anywhere, he was eager, questioning, rational, mystical, obedient, rebellious, clumsy and courteous, graceful and quick. Like too few of them elsewhere, he was generally happy and always healthy, highly intelligent and well-informed. Certain of these things, all of them to a degree, were the products of island culture. Lucky lived in a world he accepted as having been designed primarily for his own benefit, and largely it had been. Among his people there were no fears, hungers, troubles, or questions that could not be voiced, and none that would not be answered to the best extent of a child's understanding. All the children were swift and bright, but among them Lucky was especially blessed. Thus his name. He was the first in his age group to find his apprenticeship. When we came, he already knew what he wanted. A short time before that, he had spent his days, like the others, wandering from hunters to planners to makers to teachers to planters to singers, spreading his wonders and askings impartially. The other children of his age group still wandered, multiply curious, questioning the weavers and fishers and carpenters, healers and painters and crafters of food. It might be 3 or 4 seasons yet, till one by one they singled out the occupations to which they'd be bound in training at first rites. But Lucky already knew what he wanted. Before we came, he went day after day to the shrine, or the house of shrinemen, squatting patiently in the courtyard, waiting for the chance to carry sand for stone scrubbing, or water, or polishing cloths, or firewood, listening in silence to such talk as was carried on in his presence, storing up questions to ask them, Halal, when the time should be ripe. Part of each day he sat at the feet of the figures, self-hypnotized by gleaming amber and blue, silently spinning out glorious fantasies of the rebirth. His own fascination with the shrine and shrinemen, and the weight of mystery he gave to certain words and phrases, led us later to a misunderstanding of some proportions, but Halal. His persistence was already recognized in the village. The other children first, then his mothers and fathers, had noticed his absence from forest, fields, and shops. Then the shrinemen began teasing him with familiar fondness at evening gatherings and rest day games, so that everyone started to realize what he had chosen. And if it was something of a shock to parents and teachers, the boy did not know it. Perhaps because we settled as close to the shrine as we dared do. Perhaps out of the same fascination with the unknown that had already drawn him to the shrine. Lucky was our first and most frequent visitor, and became, either in his own person or as interpreter, our chief source of information about both the shrine and the islanders. He did not, at first, realize that our preoccupation with the shrine was as great as his own. We did not share his confident artlessness in question-asking. I do not know just how he explained us to himself at first, or whether he even tried. Perhaps he just waited to learn what he wanted to know. Halal. It was not passive waiting. The first day, after his first attempt to speak with us, he sat in what must have been stunned bemusement for several hours, pondering the incredible fact of a second language. We saw the squatting, inward-turned boy as a stolid, impassive indigene. I blush to admit that the phrase is from my own notebook. Then, having fully accepted that the phenomenon was not, obviously, impossible, but only previously unknown, he approached us with the second overture. We were just setting up the hand bellows for blowing foam into the camp wall forms. Lucky walked over, watched, walked away, and came back with a round stone flattened on one side, just right to prop up the foot that kept slipping. He held it out. We all stopped and stared. George Laszlo was quickest. He reached out and took the stone, smiling. Lucky smiled back. "Thank you," George said. The boy touched the stone. "Sanakyu?" His small brown face turned gold with the joy of his smile. "Merz," he said, tapping the stone. "Merz, Sanakyu?" Henry started to correct him, but Jenny and I both realized at the same time that it was better to let the error ride and not confuse the issue. Starting as a joke, we all got to where we found Sanakyu as natural a word as stone. It was astonishing how rapidly he learned. Jenny was our linguist and predictably proved quicker than the rest of us in learning the island language. But when they sat exchanging names and phrases, it was she far more often than he who had to be told twice. Once he heard a word and was sure he understood, he simply did not know how to forget. As soon as the bare minimum of mutual language was affected, Lucky, again, initiated the next step in cultural exchange. He had been showing up at the camp just after breakfast each morning. This day he came an hour earlier, with a basket of woven reeds on his arm. It was my day for KP, and I was opening a can of bacon when he came up and touched my arm, showing me the basket. "Eat my food," he said. The basket was filled with fresh steamed fish, still hot, each on its own new-baked half loaf of native meal bread. At the bottom, 5 small pots of blue clay, the same stuff the guardian figure at the shrine was molded in, held a savory vegetable sauce to be poured over fish and bread. The food was very good. Even better was the discovery that our self-appointed guide and mascot was apparently fully accredited in his friendship by the, so far, invisible parents and elders of the village. I should say parents or elders, because we were uncertain. When we asked if he'd prepared the food himself, he laughed uproariously and then said with ostentatious patience, "Food from mothers." Whether he meant mothers as a class, and in this case, his mother, or several women of the class, mother, we did not know. Both assumptions were wrong as it happened. He meant his mothers. It took us most of 6 months to reach a level of communication at which misconstructions of this sort could be cleared up. And from that time on, it seemed as though most of our discussions consisted of substituting closer approximations for old misconceptions. The more we learned, the more complex was what we had to learn. As for Lucky's wrong assumptions about us, they took even longer for him to recognize, and more time yet for us to realize he'd had them. We had been on the island the best part of a year before we gained any comprehension of the extent to which our presence had affected the boy himself. And through all that time, we so carefully leaned over backwards to avoid showing any special interest in the shrine that we had never learned of Lucky's particular infatuation with it. All through our second season on the island, by their time reckoning, we pumped a steady flow of information out of the boy. We learned the basic economy and social structure of the island and how to reckon seasons and count age and status. Lucky explained the system of education and apprenticeship, and as much as he knew of the courtship and marriage customs. When he did not know answers to what we asked, he would say, "Halal, halal, you will know." And next day, or next week, or even next season, he would come back with the answer. Most answers, that is. Sometimes the second answer, too, was halal. But then he would add, "Halal, I shall know. Then you know, too." We worried occasionally about what was happening to Lucky in his own village, whether his contact with us singled him out for better or worse. What we never imagined was the delight of his parents, he had 9 at the time, and his teachers at the effect we were having on him. In the calendar of the Shrine Islanders, there are 3 seasons to mark the year's circuit. First is green growth, when the soil is renewed, when the creatures of forest and river renew life, a time of thriving for all young things. Then comes ripening, when fawns, fish, and fruit come to full size and ripeness. Last, there is seedfall, when pods and clouds burst to shower the land with the next season's new life. when bucks rage in combat through the forest, and such spawning fish as survived the nets of the season of ripening multiply by the thousands far up the river. The calendar of events of people's lives is composed of these seasons in sets of 10. Each decade of seasons has separate significance in the course of a lifetime. 3 decades make up an age of life, a little more than 10 of our years. It is auspicious among the people to have green growth for the ruling season of one's first age. Lucky, born lucky in green growth, would come to his first rites, dividing childhood from apprenticeship, innocence from approaching courtship, just as the seasons changed from green growth to the appropriate ripening. 3 decades later, his full manhood rites would coincide with the change of the natural world from ripening to seedfall. Such children were known to be fortunate in their growing, somehow in tune with the world more than others. In Lucky's case, each sign at every stage of development had confirmed the extraordinary augury of his birth on the first morning of a green growth season. And it was for the same reason that his early interest in the shrine had so startled his elders. A child of his sort was seldom attracted by abstraction or mental mystery. Certainly the children of green growth were too much in tune with the soil to make likely celibates. Now, in pursuit of answers to the questions we asked, Lucky had gone back to learn all the things he had scorned to observe before we came. Now he watched weavers and planters and netters of fish, masons and flutists and arrow makers, with a concentrated attention that he had reserved before only for matters concerning the shrine. The older people watched and were pleased. When it had seemed clear that Lalea would be a shrineman, they had been not disappointed so much as surprised. It did not seem quite suitable for one so lavishly endowed. Now he was learning, as they had expected, all matters of concern to the people. If it were what he wished, he would of course be a shrineman, but they began speaking of him now as a future first man. The pinky strangers, whose advent was otherwise inexplicable or even a bit disturbing, had perhaps been sent to train a leader among the people, as the people themselves had not known how to do. So they reasoned. At the very least, it was certainly due to his association with us that some of the extraordinary capacities indicated as probable by various features of his birth and growth were at last fully confirmed. 2 of his fathers came to thank us. It was the first visit we had had from anyone but Lucky. Out of simple courtesy, no adult of the island would have come into our camp without some such cause. Out of simple caution, we might never have entered their village without their prior visit. It was our opening contact with the group as a whole. The fathers were overjoyed to discover that Jenny spoke their language with some proficiency. That made it possible to dismiss Lucky and thank us without requiring him to translate praise of himself or of his friends. We told them how much we admired and relied on the boy, and how very pleased we were to learn that our influence had helped him adjust to his own world and not put him out of tune with it. That is what we meant to say. But Jenny did not know any word in their language for adjust or maladjusted. She made a long speech full of metaphor and analogy, and finally one of them said, Oklal? Oklal, Lucky had told us, was the opposite of halal. Apparently they thought we were concerned about Lucky yesterday, but not tomorrow. We let well enough alone at that point, and offered food instead of conversation. Lucky rejoined us, and took obvious pride in piloting both fathers' way through the strange meal. When they left, we had an invitation to visit the village. Later, we realized that if either of the fathers had understood what Jenny was trying to say, they would not have understood our concern. And if we had understood, as we thought we did, what halal meant, we would have known that they'd see no cause to worry. They had seen Laleao's potential displayed clearly, and were naturally content to let his nature take its own course. Halal, he would learn all he needed to know. Halal, he would grow to his proper adult place. If he needed help or encouragement, they would provide it. The expectations they had begun to have before his preoccupation with the shrine now seemed once again probable. Perhaps, as time grew closer for a rebirth, it was necessary for a future first man to know more of the shrine than was usual. His unlikely interest in shrinemen might then mean only that he would be first man at the time of a rebirth. Laleal, lucky, indeed. He was well called. As for us, we were too busy and excited with our new observing privileges and with the realization of Lucky's special connection with the shrine to think much about the oddity of that tomorrow-yesterday misunderstanding. We assumed, from his father's manner of mentioning it, that the shrine was not in any way taboo. It began to seem more likely that we might eventually be allowed to examine it. If a child could spend his time there freely when his parents disapproved, it was not unreasonable to hope that visitors might also be tolerated. We were disappointed to discover that there was almost nothing Lucky was able to tell us about the shrine or shrinemen, except just such visual descriptions as we now dared to hope might be redundant. He described the figures, the blue guardian on the window of light, and the amber life-giver on the scroll pedestal. He painted a vivid word picture of the reptiloid grace of the life-giver, the menacing power of the guardian. About the shrinemen and their lives, he knew many minute details, but none of significance. They ate thus, slept so, conversed in the courtyard. They were celibate, wore brown robes with a design patterned on the window of light. They had daily rituals to say. They performed certain calculations. Halal, they would officiate at the recurrence, the rebirth. From the oldest men in the village, of whom there were 3 in their 7th age, we learned more. Each of them told us unmistakably, as a simple matter of fact, that he could recall seeing in his own early childhood a life of the shrine still extant. The recurrence itself, the rebirth, had not occurred in their own lifespans, but before they were born, at least 22 decades past. Soon, they said, the life must recur. Soon. So saying, they would glance significantly at Lucky. Halal, a rebirth. That word again, halal. In the village and fields we heard it incessantly. It was the only no answer a child ever got. No question was forbidden for young ones to ask, but some were not answered in first stage, and some not in second. Halal, they were told. Halal, you shall know. When do we plant first seed, a child might ask. In the day following the 3rd full moon of seedfall, he would be told. Which seed is first seed? And he would be shown. What comes of it? When do we harvest it? How is it stored? Who plants it? Who knows the full moon? All these would be answered, and fully, readily. The people would lay down their work, if need be, to go with a questioning child and show him the answer. But why does it grow? How does the first man know which round moon is the full moon? Or why do people seed themselves all year round, but fawns and fish only in green growth season? Then the answer was always halal, given with a glad smile for the child who was thinking ahead of his years. First-age children were to learn only what could be seen, touched, smelled, or heard. Why and wherefore were for second-agers, the adolescent apprentices. So, halal, little one. It was listening to the teaching of the children that we finally came to understand what the word meant. Not tomorrow or later, nor even, I don't know either, perhaps someday we'll both find out. What it meant precisely was in the fullness of time. The distinction is not nearly as much in the words as in the kind of thinking that must lie behind them. Shrine Islanders, for instance, fear death less than any society known, and this with no trace of belief in discrete immortality. In the fullness of time, one is born, grows and learns, loves, weds and begets, rears children, teaches the young ones, acquires status, grows feeble, and dies. If death comes, then one's time is full. From the answers that were and were not given youngsters in Lucky's age group, we also came to understand how we must have troubled him with our determined questioning about the shrinemen. Here, too, we had progressed through a series of dead-wrong assumptions. Because Lucky told us of books and calculations, of ideographs on the shrine, which he could reproduce flawlessly but with no comprehension. Because he had never seen books in the village, or never spoke of them. Because he, the brightest of his age group, went daily to the house of shrinemen, We first took for granted that the shrinemen were priestly scholars, perhaps the guardians of an ancient culture, their roles symbolized by the red-maced blue guardian figure protecting the life-giver. A goddess, clearly, but perhaps more of wisdom than fertility. The reptilian appearance suggested this strongly. Henry got very enthusiastic about the correlation of snakes and divinely protected knowledge. Rebirth could imply a predictable renaissance, and that suggested the ugly thought that the secrecy of the shrinemen's rites and formulae was that of an unplanned bureaucracy, perpetuating itself by withholding the knowledge it had been set up to protect and disseminate. When we understood what halal meant, we had to revise this unhappy picture, for much of what Lucky did not know was no secret at all, just oklal at his age. By that time, also, we had heard from the three oldest men so many mutually confirming details of the appearance and function of the life of the shrine that the whole notion of a usurping bureaucracy became absurd. Rebirth, they insisted, was no symbol, but a literal incarnation of new wisdom, presented at intervals of roughly, by our time, 80 years. The incarnation took the form of a frog-like creature, at least roughly resembling the statue and relief figures at the shrine. The old men all recalled quite clearly an identical figure, except for the color, which was gray. So the shrinemen became shamans, half-ignorant, half-wise witch doctors, applying without understanding some ancient formulae designed to release increments of knowledge slowly to a population reverted, for what strange, intriguing reasons, to barbarism. The near-idyllic society we saw was the planned result of this program, and the quiet patience of the halal philosophy made sense now. Halal, all would be known. We need only wait. Halal. But for witch doctors, the shrinemen were poor showmen. Neither did they do any healing, any more than they governed. Both of these were functions of all other people who lived into the second decade of the Sixth Age. The shaman theory began to fall apart the night George found out that the man next to him at a hay-bringing dance was a shaman, off duty for the party. The putative witch doctor invited us all, very casually, to visit him at the shrine. There had never been any taboo. No one had suspected we might be interested. We found the shrinemen, as we had first assumed they would be, educated and cultured in the bookish sense, far above the level of other islanders. They were intelligent men devoted to a faith, or more to a duty, and they knew that when rebirth occurred, it was necessary that they be on hand, trained in the formulae of sacrifice. Without their precise weights and measures and chants, the life of the shrine would be monstrous and harmful. The oldest men, we suggested, were saying it was near halal for recurrence. The shrinemen nodded. They brought out a register, a long papyrus-like scroll. 1/4 of its length was filled with ideographs, like those on the shrine itself, tantalizingly like but unlike 3 different ancient languages Jenny did know. On this scroll, they said, was the listing of dates and persons connected with the lives of the shrine. The first entry in barely legible, long-faded ink went back, they said, almost 350 decades. Nearly 1,200 years, as we reckon. One of them spread the scroll on a lectern and began intoning with such sing-song regularity it was evident he was reciting by rote and not actually reading. Yet there was an air of authenticity about their list. Whatever was actually in the scroll, whether they could really read the symbols or not. We were convinced that the time intervals, ranging from 19 to 30 decades between recurrences, were legitimate history. The question was, history of what? The answer, of course, was halal. The next recurrence, whatever it was due to occur any time, any day, that was, in the next 16 years. If the day came soon enough, before our supplies or our patience ran out, we'd know what it was. What and who, when and where. If not, why and wherefore. To the life of the shrine, we were all as first-agers. Thus we arrived at our last misconception regarding the shrinemen. They were, obviously, an especially non-virulent academic breed of priest, serving their temple with civilized, pleasant lives devoted to learning, discussion, and ritual. Halal, what they rememorized every day, would be of not just use, but great need. Happily, by that time, we understood Lucky at least better than we did the shrine. As a result, we did not plague him with our latest errors, and plaguing they would have been, to say the least. Religion, as we know it, had no words in the Shrine Island language. Sin, priest, faith, morals were not just subjects unsuitable for children, they were concepts unknown to the people. We did not intend to introduce them. Since it would have been Lucky to whom we expressed our ideas about the shrinemen first, it is doubly fortunate we did not do so. For Lucky was lucky. From the time of his birth on, it was the outstanding trait of his young life. There's a certain innocence, when you think of it, implicit in the idea of luck. A truly lucky person has always a certain natural and glorious naivete, a sort of superior unconsciousness, which can do for some people in their acts and impulses precisely what the well-trained reflex reactions of a star athlete do for his body. The special ability to seize the right moment with the right hand is as vulnerable to conscious thought as the act of high jumping would be to a man who tried to think each muscle separately into action. So it is well that we did not force on Lucky an exercise of the metaphysical part of his mind that his keen intelligence could never have refused once offered. We had been almost 5 full seasons on the island when the second ship came. Lucky, of course, with his rare instinct, was walking in the woods when it landed, not half a mile from where it came down. 3 people emerged, 3 more Pinkies. Rejoicing, the boy ran to greet them, one thought predominant in his young mind. Here at last was the making of a Pinky family. 7 is the minimum number of adults in an island household, and frankly, we had never attempted to explain our own customs to Lucky. What could he have made of the concept of one-to-one possessiveness? He simply assumed that we had no children because we were too few in number to form a family. With these thoughts in mind, he ran forward and greeted the strangers in clear, pure English, offering to guide them immediately to our camp. They seemed to have managed a rapid recovery, when one considers the shock this must have provided. Politely, they excused themselves and announced they had come not to join us, whom they had never heard of course, but to pay their respects to the famous shrine. Lucky led them there. On the way, they talked pleasantly with him. Pleasantly, but wrongly. They did not sound like Pinkies, not like the Pinkies he knew. Vaguely, he sensed something oklal, unripe, green, out of place and time. Gradually, his answers to the oversweet probings of the female among them became less clear, so that by the time she asked the 2 crucial questions, he was almost incoherent. So, they did not find out how many Pinkies were on the island, nor how many others spoke English. If they had known, there were only 4 of us, unarmed academics, and only Lucky beside ourselves who would ever know how to tell the world outside what happened. Everything might have been quite different. Strangely, Lucky took them directly to the shrine window. This was bad etiquette. He should have presented them first to the shrinemen. But he was already acting under the impulse of that strange quality of luckiness that ruled his life. Then he found himself staring at Life-Giver, terribly torn and uncertain, not knowing why he had brought the strangers there, or why he had spoken them softly in false friendship. The amber figure glowed in double light, sunlight cascading from the unroofed courtyard, and the golden glow from inside the window. Lucky, I believe it was he, said later that he did what he did just because she was beautiful. A simple act of adoration. Certainly he was confused, aware of a responsibility too large for his young shoulders, and seeking guidance of some sort. I know, because I watched it happen, that he moved forward in an almost trance-like manner. Everything, from the moment of the meeting in the forest up to this point, I know only from having been told. What occurred in the courtyard I saw for myself. It was almost time for the shrinemen's evening ritual, and Henry and I were on the hilltop with binoculars watching. This is what happened. Lalea stepped forward and fell to his knees before the statue of the Life-Giver. He reached up and his lanky arms were just long enough to wrap around her smooth stone legs. He gazed up at her, and then bent his head, resting it against the carvings at the top of the scroll pedestal. At the instant of contact, the mace fell from the hands of the blue guardian. The two men were fast. One jumped for the mace, one for Lucky, while the second one held the boy still. The first studied the rod and the figure, and then reached out with the red mace and seemed to be twisting it against something on the window. Later, we figured out it must have been the guardian's eye he was twisting. The open end of the rod is exactly the shape and size of the opal eye of the guardian. We did not see the window open. It opened inwards, and our angle of vision was wrong. But we knew what was happening from the oddly expressive way the three intruders stood and stared at the window and at each other, questioning, triumphant, frightened, uncertain. We also saw the shrinemen coming, a split second before the woman did. We saw her point and heard her cry faintly from down below. The others turned to look, and all three lost their irresolution. They moved as one, taking Lucky with them. All four vanished, from our angle of view, inside the shrine. The shrinemen came to a full stop in front of the window. Had it closed again? I looked at Henry for the first time and found him turning to look at me. It occurred to us simultaneously that we ought to be doing something to help. "You stay," he said. "I'll get the others. Keep watching." It was the sensible way to do it. I put the glasses back to my eyes. Incredibly, the shrinemen were arranging themselves in their evening ritual position as calmly as though it were any sundown. They formed their semicircle in front of the window and brought forth the shining silver-tipped quills that were their badge of office, held them up like dart throwers, as they always did, and began their sundown chant. Perhaps the window had not closed before. If it had opened again. My first thought was that the guardian figure had fallen, but it was not the molded figure. It was separate and alive. It was blue and glistening, and it sprang down to the ground, crouched, alert, so clearly menacing in its intentions it was not necessary to see the face to understand the inherent malice. It had barely touched ground when a quill, a dart rather, from the first shrineman in the semicircle, caught it in the face. The eye, I have always assumed. The same left eye that must be the key to the shrine. By that time another had leaped out, and the next dart brought it down. It went so almost casually, so rhythmically, so soundlessly, and with such economy of motion on both sides that it seemed unreal. There were 10 of the blue things altogether. At the 6th, I took my eyes from the glasses, blinked, shook my head, and looked back, unbelieving. I saw the same thing. But remember, I did have that moment of doubt. Without any break in the rhythm, the 11th figure came out of the shrine. It was not blue or crouching or perilous. It was brown gold of skin and leaped like a dancer, and as it landed, the shrinemen who still held their darts poised dropped them. And the whole semicircle burst into a chant of marvelous joy and welcoming. They faltered just once, when, still in the same timing, the 12th creature came forth. Then the chant rang out again, louder and more joyous. But those who had dropped unused darts retrieved them. They finished the song, the 2 lives of the shrine standing inside their circle, apart from the heap of lifeless blue bodies. Then, the window must have closed meantime. They clearly knew the rebirth was completed. 4 of them walked to the 2 shining creatures, bowed to them, in the islander's bow of courtesy, not one of reverence, and led them into the house. The others approached the dead entities, picked them up, and carried them off, around the house, out of sight. My stage was empty. I waited till dark, but saw no more. Not till I started down to the camp did I even wonder what had become of Henry and the others, who should have had time to arrive at the scene before the chant began. I found out when they joined me, a few minutes after I got back to camp. The gates of the shrine courtyard had been closed and barred. They had knocked and called out and waited, also till dark, without answer. They had heard the chant of rejoicing. They had seen nothing. I told them what I had seen. I told it hesitantly. I did not completely believe my own memory. And when all our questions and probings produced only mildly startled or baffled replies from villagers and shrinemen alike, we all had to doubt what I thought I had seen. There was no doubt about what Henry and I had seen together. This was supported by the presence of a strange ship in the forest with no passengers, and by Lucky's disappearance. We left the island a few weeks later. Our supplies might have lasted another month, but we all felt restless, and we missed Lucky, both personally and in our work. We had not been able to get any explanations from anyone about what had happened, but we saw no likelihood of learning more by staying longer, and we had to report the outlaw ship. We agreed that as far as we knew, as far as 4 so-called scientists could claim to know anything, 4 people had entered the shrine, after which a watcher on the hilltop, Henry's article so describes me, experienced an extraordinarily vivid hallucination, or hypnotic illusion, during a prolonged ritual chant. For the others, that agreement was sufficient. They hadn't had the hallucination. I went back, and of course we had left too soon. Our questions had been, naturally, Oklal. The life of the shrine is never revealed until the next rites. This time it was a tremendous revelation. Never before had twin lives occurred. I stayed 2 full seasons on the island that second trip. This time I lived in a special visitor's capacity with Lalayal's family. I learned to speak their language much better, and I spent many hours in talk with the shrinemen and with the lives. The lives told me about Lucky's meeting with the strange Pinkies. They told me how he felt when he fell on his knees before the life-giver. They told me they were reborn of him in the shrine. They told me how it felt, but could not tell me how or why it happened. They didn't know. We all speculated, the lives, the shrinemen and I, on what the shrine itself might be, and what sort of force could produce 10 glistening blue demons from 3 evil humans, and 2 golden angels from 1 lucky boy. With all the speculation and all I was told, I came back with not 1 shred of scientific evidence that anything of the sort happened. For all I know, the lives may still be a hypnotic illusion produced by the shrinemen. They may be some sort of periodic mutation. They may be Lucky reborn. The lives do not know any more than I how the shrine came to be there, or what happened inside a chamber which they can describe only as filled with great light. I tried approaching the life-giver as Lucky had. The shrinemen gave full permission, clearly amused. Nothing happened, though I tried it often with minute variations of head and hand positions. I may have missed the exact pressure points. I may have had the wrong attitude. I believe myself that I simply do not have the kind of unconsciousness Lucky had. Or just say, my approach was Oklal. My own tendency, also, is to believe that the shrine is a sort of outpost of some other planet. But why this should feel any more scientific to me than the shrinemen's belief in an ancient lost magic, I don't know. The shrinemen, by the way, are still worried over some things. The weight of the entering bodies was never ascertained, they point out. If there was unused mass left inside the shrine, they cannot say what may come forth the next time a pure innocent embraces goodness for her own sake. These things must be done by the formulae, they say. They feel this rebirth was most unscientific, you see. The embracer is not supposed to enter the shrine. A fawn of so and so much weight precisely is the only proper sacrifice. But these minor worries are unimportant, beside the double miracle of 2 lives of the shrine at 1 rebirth. The islanders generally feel they are alive at a time of great good luck. They are creating dozens of songs and stories and paintings and dances about Lalayal, the lucky one who brought luck to his people. I present this account of what I saw, what I heard, what I know of the shrine and its rebirth recurrence. I have no evidence to prove its validity.